The purpose is giving free land to homesteaders is that the land may be made productive, and giving homesteads to single women would tend directly against that idea. And that is a quote from Lone Women by Victor Lavelle. That's from page 271. Lone Woman was published in 2023. This is a mix of horror, Western, and it's 284 pages. I read this for my interview with the vampire-inspired readathon, where I snoop onto the shelves of our beloved characters and discuss what books they have on their shelves and why. So it's just to feed my fangirl heart and this drought before season 3 of Interview the Vampire comes back. Apologies for the noise. I hear it right now. All right, so I am fulfilling prompt, trying to survive the delusions of others. Where do I start with this book? Narrator. I did hybrid read this along. So basically the print, I listened along with the audio. The narrator was Jonice Abbott Pratt, who I immediately recognized because they were the narrator for Tananarive Dew's The Reformatory, which was also horror. So I don't know if they lean towards reading for narrating for horror, but I thought that was kind of an interesting connection, especially since both kind of play with time. All right. So just to give you like a little bit of a short synopsis, this takes place in 1915. Madeleine Henry leaves California behind for Montana, but she not only brings herself, she brings along her mysterious trunk with her. Mysterious because we as the audience are wondering what is inside the trunk. She leaves California for Montana because she wants a chance to own land. And apparently, if you tend to the land in Montana for about 3 years back then, the land would become yours. And that was some sort of like homestead act, I believe. This was a medium to slow pace book, which is definitely like going to be my jumping off point for discussing this book. Where do I start? I've seen some critiques, and I've definitely heard, I was talking to a buddy of mine about this book, because for some people, this book fell flat. And I think I could understand why. I really enjoyed this book. There was a little bit of a lull in the middle, but I think the pacing is an issue, but I also think that that is earned and warranted for the mixing of the genres that the author is doing. I wanted to bring up a couple of examples of the pacing that this book reminded me of. One of them was How Much of These Hills Are Gold, and this is by C. Pam Zhang. This is written in the style of a Western, and when you're reading it, you're under the impression that you're in the past, or what we know to be the American West. But if you look inside, each part has a number representing the time. I don't know if you can see this, but there's 2 X's where you would think there would be like a 19 or an 18 or whatnot, like 1859, 1959. This is meant to give us, the reader, an indication that this could happen at any time, basically. But it's written like as a Western. That's the best way I could put it. There's also another book I really liked, which is Woman of Light, which is also written as a Western. And so there's that slow pace that I've seen in Western novels. Also, both of those books, for the most part, the main characters are female. lastly, there is Vampires of El Norte, and this is by Isabel Cañas. This is probably going to be the most prominent example I use because this really is meant to be and marketed as a mix of horror and Western. And plenty of people had a critique about this book because in this book it has the name Vampires in the title, and there's not a lot of vamping going on. But that's because vampires are also very heavily looming as a symbolic entity as much as a literal entity in the story. And so all those books speak to like women protagonists, but also within the horror genre purely or like being meshed with different genres as well, to talk about those experiences. And also, as I'm going there, because there's a consideration of how people are perceiving lone women, I kind of wanted to talk about these two different genre mixing. So for the American Western, there's certain tenets, I guess you'd say, are also tropes, which is there's like this rugged individualism, freedom, and the exploration of the American West. And it often incorporates like realism, but regionalism being like Montana itself, and naturalism. And it's meant to reflect the cultural diversity and historical context in the United States, which we definitely get in here. But what I really liked about this is clearly this author is knowledgeable about the Western and subverts some of those, I guess you can say, the tenet that you see in a Western, which is the individualism, right? There's a sense of these characters in this book. Owning the land is seen as like a opportunity for a better life, but also like a symbol of freedom in a way. And so getting to how the author subverts this is, yes, this character feels kind of like alone, but along the way, what they realize is that you cannot survive the land, you cannot survive the circumstance, you cannot survive the harsh weather without others. So found family, leaning on community is the answer. Sisterhood is the answer. And so that kind of like unfurls throughout the story. And so that really like buck ups against like that particular American Western tenet. Additionally, there is the other mixing of genre, which is very specific to like American horror. And that always explores like dark aspects of human nature, like social anxieties, and like supernatural elements. There's a sense of fear and unease. The unease and the fear is definitely there, and could explore like just the supernatural or like the unknown, right? So there's kind of like this mixing of the vastness of the land, and the unknown mystery that's going around, surrounding the trunk that the character Adelaide has, that kind of gives that sense of the unknown. So the unknown of what the character is trying to like survive and accomplish versus, hey, what's in the box, right? And so, yeah. Also, like horror also can deal with like political issues and social issues that need to be addressed. And that's also what's playing at, right, between the Western and this horror genre. And so in here, we have this character Adelaide that has a trunk. But through all these like different characters that this Adelaide comes up against, they're also dealing with, yes, a secret of the box, but there's this burden of secrets amongst the women. And there's also, I know it's trunk, but I keep thinking about box. I keep thinking about symbolically how people box others in, and in turn they also box themselves, and that can be done in different iterations. It could be done generationally by parents. It could be done by oneself. It's done by the system. It's done by like political and social system. And so that really stuck out to me. And throughout the book, when I was reading this, I kept thinking about the book Frankenstein. That really just spoke to me while I was reading this, because there's this idea of what a villain is, or who we think the villain is, and then us like interrogating who's a real villain of the story. There's also a conversation about like nature versus nurture. What is the price of like this ambition for the land? Who gets hurt by this? And that's like really explicitly spoken about, as well as like the free will, one's own free will, and the human condition, as well as one's own accountability for who we put in boxes, right? And so that really just stuck out to me the most. And so I'd have to say that I do understand why some people have an issue with the pacing. I think that if someone picks up this book and they tend to read horror only, I could see how they might be disappointed, or just like feeling like the book is lacking something because of the pacing. It might make someone feel like there's a lack of dynamics. And also because although there is this looming supernatural creature that does at some point come to the forefront, but it takes so long before we get there, that might also be an issue. But it wasn't an issue for me. I really enjoyed it. And what I thought was in the box was actually, I was wrong. I was completely wrong. And I actually liked what the author did more, because it actually ground the story moving forward, and really let us like understand what they're really trying to explore. And so, yeah, I just really liked it. But again, in the middle, it did feel a little bit of a lull. So it kind of took me some time to like get on track and feel invested once more into the story. I'm trying to think if I have any other critiques. That's about it. I still really enjoyed it. I enjoy the structure overall. I felt a little bit choked up towards the end. I also think that there's a big conversation to have about not just acceptance of others, but like acceptance of oneself, and also forgiveness. I'm trying to think about everything else I could possibly think of, but I really enjoyed this. But I would just keep those particular critiques in mind if you haven't read this and you decide to pick it up. Just be aware that this is a blending of genres, and that might kind of like buck up against what you think the pacing experience would be. Yeah, so that's like the biggest concern. Again, it didn't bother me, but I do tend to feel like I don't mind a slower pace if it feels like the story is earning that. And I definitely feel like the author did that. Additionally, there is a little chat in the back with the author and discussion questions, which would be great for a book club if you're interested in doing that. So I hope you enjoyed this meandering of you. Tariel's right behind me, but she's fast asleep. Oh, and before, oh my gosh, I can't believe I almost forgot. Hello, I'm reading this for my readathon. And I almost forgot to bring up the connections to Madeleine. All right, let's discuss. Oh my goodness. Why does Madeleine have this on her shelf? Whew. I'm going to try to toe the line because I don't want to spoil too much in here. But Madeleine is trying to survive the delusions of others. And this is very difficult to talk about without giving away the book. But if you've read this, I enjoyed the conversation about what was in the box, and would the thing that's in the box even be what it is if it wasn't for the people and their lives telling them who they are, you know, like preemptively making this decision for them, treating them in a particular way that puts in that position. And that's definitely something that Madeleine has experienced themselves by the choices that they've made in their life. Definitely some controversial choices, kind of like as the war wound down. She already went on her own social stoning, if you will, trial, only to have to go on trial once again, to have fingers pointing and discussing in a theater who is a real monster. And that, by the way, is something that literally happens in this book. There's a scene in the theater, and there's a confrontation, a very dramatic confrontation that takes place. And that really actually made me think about season 2 of Interview the Vampire and what Madeleine and Claudia go through. So that's kind of what I was really thinking about in terms of the connection to Madeleine, and why she would have this on her shelf, but also looking at someone in front of you for who they really are and like accepting them. And that's something that Madeleine could always do. She could always see the BS, and she tried to survive it as long as she could until she couldn't anymore, right? And that's worth taking note, especially since Madeleine and Claudia are 2 female vampires. And depending on how the show goes, we see in season 1, there's one other female vampire, and they die by the end of season 1. Season 2, 2 female vampires die. Actually, that's not true. More than 2 female vampires die. There's 2 on a motorcycle, and then there's Madeleine and Claudia, and then there's also the revenant female old vampire. I can't think of their name at this time, but they all die. And I find that very interesting in terms of like a gendered conversation about who survives, especially keeping in mind that for Anne Rice didn't feel like she identified with her own gender. So it's really interesting what characters survive and which don't in her books. But yeah, that's my constant chatter. So there's definitely a connection. And I think all those explorations of seeing someone for who they really are and confronting, investigating oneself and others is why Madeleine would actually like pick up this book and have it on her shelf, but also being a part of seeing like the strength of women surviving their circumstance when society, politics, government, all of it is up against you. All right, everyone, I hope you enjoyed this review where I almost forgot the most important part. Thank you so much. I hope you join me on this marathon. Keep in mind, it's going on this year and next year. Each character covers for 2 months, okay? So that's 1 book a week for the most part, a live show at the end of the month, as long as the schedule permits for each of my guests. And so at the end of this week, I should have a live show. I am still trying to lock down a time with my guests. So look forward to that announcement soon. All right, everyone. Life is chaos. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and read more books. Bye.